to Money Talks. Last week we discussed your unofficial tenants, the squatters, the ones who do not pay you any rent and who will live like kings, using your utilities for which you have to pay by law. This week we're going to talk about your official tenants, those who do pay you rent, and what you as a landlord can do to create a harmonious relationship between you and your paying tenants. You hear of all kinds of horror stories from both sides of the fence, landlords and tenants, and in my property career, both as a landlord and as a letting and management agent, I've learned many lessons on the way. As a landlord, there are two main things that you're interested in. Will the tenants pay their rent on time? Will they look after your property? So what can you do to ensure that your property is let out easily and that the tenancy runs smoothly? The landlord's responsibility is to make sure the property is clean, that maintenance has been kept up, and that the appliances are all in good working order, that you have all the necessary legal documents, for example, the gas safety certificate, the electrical certificate, that you have specialist landlord insurance to cover you for public liability, that your property is inviting and attractive to prospective tenants, that you have a realistic rental figure in mind, that you're ready to deal with issues promptly and ensure that you understand the tenancy agreement and that your tenants understand and agree to whatever they're signing. If you're using an agent, make sure they sit down with the prospective tenants and spell out each part of the tenancy agreement. Legal documents are often complicated and each person's obligations need to be explained fully. As a letting agent, I always sat down with the tenants before they signed the lease and went through every aspect of it. Often we had foreigners who did not have a good command of the English language, and it was vital that they knew what they were signing their names to. It's so important each party knows what they're responsible for. For example, the landlord is obliged to get repairs done as quickly as possible to the property. However, sometimes tenants can take this to extremes. I had some tenants who just moved into one of my properties, and they rang me up at 10 o'clock at night and asked me to come over urgently as they needed some light bulbs putting in. Some issues are very difficult to enforce, even though the tenants may have signed and agreed to them in their lease. For example, you may be very clear that you don't want animals in your property. However, once a tenant has paid you their deposit and has moved into your property, it's very difficult to get them out if they just decide that they want to have a cat. This happened to me with one of my rental properties. I thought I'd found an excellent tenant, her references checked out well, she paid her deposit and a month's rent in advance and signed the lease agreement. I probably would never have known about it, but a neighbour happened to tell me that she'd seen a cat regularly going in and out of my property. So I asked the tenant and she said, "Oh, that's not my cat. I'm minding it for a friend while she's away." Of course, I later found out that the supposed friend was away for months on end and never came back to pick up her cat. So short of going through the court process of evicting my tenant, which is both time-consuming and costly, I made the decision that as long as she continued to pay her rent on time, I'd see what condition she left the property in when her tenancy came to an end, and I would have the option to withhold some monies from her deposit if the cat had caused any damage and if I needed to clean the carpets upon her departure. The sticky part comes in is when a tenant decides when you're withholding the last month's rent and they decide to stay there for that last month, and when they leave, you don't have that security. These are tough economic times, but my suggestion is that if you can get it, try to get a first month, a last month and a month's security and tell the tenant that they cannot use the month's security as rent. This should be part of the tenancy agreement. So to summarise, make sure you and your tenants really understand the tenancy agreement. Have them sign that they have read the agreement, that they have discussed it with you and that they have understood it and agreed to it. Because they could say later on that they don't speak the language very well, that they didn't know what they were reading, they didn't know what you were saying, but they needed a place to live, so they signed it. In many countries, the laws are on the side of the tenant, not the landlord. So if you have this in your agreement, you at least have some legal leg to stand on. Try to ensure that if your laws permit it, you have a clause that entitles you to evict the tenants immediately should they bring animals into your property. But conversely, I bought a property that already had tenants in it. And not having had the experience of dealing with animals in my property prior to that, I didn't realise what I was letting myself in for. The tenant had 14 dogs and 9 cats in a 2-bedroom apartment. The smell and the filth from those animals was positively unbearable. In fact, the smell of stale urine had penetrated so deeply that not only did the carpets have to be replaced, but also the floors had to be torn up and replaced as well. A month's security deposit would never have even started to cover all that work because of all those animals, as the costs ran into thousands of pounds. So you may want to find out if your laws will allow you to put into your lease that you have the right to evict your tenant immediately if they bring animals into your property. And if you're able to do it, they have to sign that they understood what it was about and they're agreeing to it. Don't go away, I'll be back soon.